A crowded bus. A young man shames his mother in public until a silent military veteran steps in with a story that changes everything. What happened next left everyone stunned. The city bus was packed, every seat taken, and the aisle filled with standing passengers clutching onto metal poles for balance. It was a typical late afternoon in Birmingham, Alabama. The air felt heavy with the faint smell of diesel and lingering chatter, creating a kind of background noise that everyone was used to. In one of the middle rows sat a young man, early 20s, with a sharp jawline and an air of entitlement. His voice cut through the dull hum of the bus. "How could you forget that, Mum? Seriously, it's embarrassing," he barked, gesturing wildly next to him. His mother, an elderly woman with silvery hair and kind, tired eyes, fidgeted with the straps of her purse. She looked down, avoiding the gazes that darted in their direction. "I'm sorry, Nathan," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I thought I put it in the bag before we left." The son groaned loudly, tossing his head back as though the world had personally conspired against him. "You always do this. It's like you can't keep track of anything. No wonder Dad got frustrated with you." Gasps rippled among the passengers who could hear him. A woman seated nearby glanced over disapprovingly, while a man further back muttered something under his breath, but no one said anything, not yet. At the back of the bus, sitting straight with his hands resting on his knees, was a tall black man in a military uniform. His name tag read Gaines, though no one paid much attention to it. His presence was quiet, but commanding. The rows of medals on his chest hinted at a lifetime of service, but his expression was unreadable, as Nathan's voice rose again, berating his mother for what seemed to be a forgotten grocery item. Gaines tilted his head slightly, his sharp, observant eyes flicked toward the scene unfolding in front of him. He didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The mother's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She whispered, "Please, Nathan, not here. Let's talk about it later. Talk about it later." Nathan snapped loud enough for the entire bus to hear. "You don't get it, do you? You ruin everything this time." The collective discomfort was palpable. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A teenager pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll, but angling it just enough to catch the scene. No one dared to intervene yet. Everyone was clearly waiting for something, anything to break the tension. From his seat, Gaines exhaled deeply, the slightest sound that somehow carried weight. His eyes lingered on the mother for a moment before returning to Nathan. He leaned back slightly, his hands still resting calmly on his knees. But there was an unmistakable intensity in his posture. The tension in the air was building, and the entire bus seemed to hold its breath, wondering who would act first. Nathan's tirade continued, his voice growing sharper with every word. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the once muted conversations now silenced entirely. It was as if the bus itself had become smaller, the air heavier with every cutting remark. "Can't you do anything right?" Nathan sneered, leaning closer to his mother, who shrank into her seat. "You're so useless." Sometimes the elderly woman flinched, but said nothing. Her hands clutched her purse tightly as though it were a lifeline. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, her lips pressed together in a thin line. It wasn't the first time she'd endured her son's outbursts, but the public humiliation added an extra layer of pain. Her shoulders seemed to cave inward, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. A man in his 30s, standing near the front, adjusted his tie and glanced back, his expression torn between indignation and hesitation. The woman beside him whispered, Someone should say something, but no one did not yet. At the back, Gaines shifted slightly in his seat. His dark, piercing eyes stayed locked on Nathan, studying him carefully. Not with anger, but with a kind of focused curiosity. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the rising tension around him. He didn't speak, but the weight of his silence was noticeable. It was as if he were waiting, calculating the exact moment to step in. Nathan's voice cracked as he continued his anger, starting to spiral. "You know, this is why Dad left. You're a mess. Always have been." His words landed like a slap audible even to those at the far end of the bus. The mother's face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, hoping no one noticed. But of course everyone did, a wave of discomfort. Swept through the bus, people who had been pretending not to listen suddenly couldn't look away. The teen recording the scene tapped her friend on the shoulder and muttered, "This is gonna blow up online." Her friend shook her head, murmuring, "It's just sad." Gaines straightened in his seat. His hands, previously relaxed on his knees now, gripped the edge of his seat. His expression didn't change, but there was a new energy about him, a quiet determination. As Nathan opened his mouth to hurl another insult, a soft yet commanding voice finally broke through the tension, young man. The voice belonged to an older woman sitting a few rows ahead. She turned slightly in her seat, her eyes filled with disapproval. "Don't you think you've said enough?" Nathan froze for a moment, startled by the interruption. His face twisted into a scowl as he replied, "This isn't your business, lady." But before the exchange could escalate further, Gaines stood. The sheer presence of the man was enough to draw every eye on the bus. He was tall, his uniform immaculate, and the calm authority in his posture was impossible to ignore. With slow, deliberate steps, he made his way down the aisle, the bus now so quiet that the hum of the engine was the only sound as he approached. Nathan seemed to shrink in his seat, his earlier bravado faltering under the weight of Gaines's gaze. The passengers watched, their anticipation thick in the air. This was the moment they'd all been waiting, for the moment when someone finally did something. But what Gaines would say next was something no one could have predicted. Gaines stopped a few feet away from Nathan, his towering presence casting a shadow over the young man. He looked at Nathan, then shifted his gaze to the elderly woman, her cheeks streaked with silent tears. He exhaled slow and steady before speaking. "I wasn't going to say anything." Gaines began, his voice deep and steady, carrying an undeniable authority. "But sitting back and watching this, that's not something I can do." Nathan's defiance flared momentarily. "What are you going to lecture me now?" he snapped. Though his voice wavered, Gaines ignored the outburst, his attention shifting to the mother. He crouched slightly, leveling himself to her eyeline. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you deserve respect, especially from your own blood." His words were gentle, but they carried a weight that made the entire bus listen. Turning back to Nathan, Gaines straightened up, his voice firm but measured. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Someone who thought they had all the time in the world to say." "Sorry," Nathan blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Gaines tilted his head slightly, his expression hard to read. "I served 20 years in the military, seen places you wouldn't believe, done things I still carry with me every single day." His voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to lean in to catch every word. "But nothing haunts me more than the day I buried my mother." The bus fell completely silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade into the background. I was a young man, full of myself, Thought I knew better than the woman who raised me. Gaines continued, his tone laced with pain. She'd call me, ask how I was doing, and I'd brush her off. I'm busy, Mom. I'd say I'll call you later, but later never came. One day I got the call. She was gone. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier bravado now replaced by something else, an emotion he wasn't ready to confront. Gaines stepped closer, his voice dropping even lower. Do you know what it feels like to stand over a casket, wishing for just one more chance to say I'm sorry, to tell her you mattered to me? I love you. But you can't, because it's too late. The tension in the bus was suffocating now, every passenger hanging on to his words. The elderly woman wiped her face with trembling hands, her lips pressed together as if holding back a sob. Gaines leaned slightly toward Nathan, his tone sharpening. Don't be the kind of man who waits until it's too late. That's a regret you'll carry forever. Nathan's face flushed, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. His hands clenched the fabric of his jeans, his head hanging slightly lower. The entire bus seemed frozen, as though no one dared to break the moment. Then Nathan's response shattered the silence, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Nathan sat motionless for a moment, his knuckles white as they gripped his jeans. The bravado he had flaunted earlier was gone, replaced by a fragile stillness. Slowly he raised his head, his eyes meeting Gaines's. The defiance had drained from his face, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. His voice cracked as he spoke. He faltered, swallowing hard. I didn't mean to hurt her. The words hung in the air, trembling like a fragile thread. His mother's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise, but she said nothing. Her silence heavy with emotion, Gaines didn't move, his gaze steady and unrelenting. Then say it, he said, his voice calm but firm. Say what you're afraid to say. Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out again. But then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. He turned to his mother, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her arm. She flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, Mom. Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. I've been so angry, and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve. That tear spilled down his mother's cheeks as she looked at him, her expression softening. Oh, Nathan, she said, her voice breaking. You're my son. I've always forgiven you, but hearing you say this, it means so much. The bus seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting slightly. A few passengers exchanged glances, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Even the teenager who had been recording lowered her phone, her earlier smirk replaced by something softer. Nathan's apology hung in the air, but he wasn't done. He turned back to Gaines, his voice steadier now. Thank you. He said, his words carrying an earnestness that hadn't been there before. I didn't realize how much I was taking her for granted. Hearing your story, it hit me. Gaines nodded, his expression softening. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong, he said, but what matters is what you do next. Words are just the beginning. Nathan looked down, a shadow of shame still lingering on his face. I want to do better, he said quietly. For her, the elderly woman placed a hand over her son's, her fingers trembling but warm. We'll figure it out, she said, her voice filled with both hope and love. Gaines stepped back, his towering frame retreating slightly as the moment shifted. He glanced around the bus, meeting the eyes of a few passengers who nodded silently, their expressions filled with respect. But just as the atmosphere began to lighten, something unexpected happened, shocking everyone once again as the bus rolled to a stop at a red light. A voice from the back startled everyone. It was the elderly man seated near the emergency exit, someone no one had noticed until now. He leaned forward, his voice gravely but strong enough to carry a young man. He called out to Nathan, "You've taken the first step. Don't stop now." All eyes turned to the older gentleman. His weathered face told a story of years of hard-earned wisdom. He adjusted his flat cap and continued his tone firm, but not unkind. "I lost my son a few years ago. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. Do you know what I'd give? For just 5 minutes to tell him how much I loved him? Don't waste the time you've got." Nathan's face turned a deeper shade of red, his eyes welling up with tears he couldn't hold back. He glanced at his mother, her hand still resting gently on his. For the first time in what seemed like forever, there was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding. Nathan looked around the bus, realizing how many strangers had witnessed his shame and his apology. He stood up abruptly, taking his mother's hand. "Come on, Mom," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "Let's get off here. I want to talk, really talk." The passengers parted to let them through, some offering soft smiles, others giving slight nods of encouragement as they exited the bus. A quiet murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Gaines watched them leave, his expression unreadable. But as the doors closed behind them, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He returned to his seat, leaning back with a sense of quiet accomplishment. A few rows ahead, the teenager who had been recording stopped the video, hesitated for a moment, and then deleted it. "Not everything needs to go online," she muttered to her friend, who nodded in agreement. The bus continued its journey, and though the hum of conversation slowly returned, the atmosphere had changed. People weren't just mindlessly scrolling their phones or staring out the window anymore. They were reflecting on family, on forgiveness, on the fragile, fleeting nature of time. As the bus neared Gaines's stop, the man seated next to him finally spoke. "That was something back there?" he said, his voice low. "The way you handled that, it made me think I haven't called my mom in weeks. I think I'll do that tonight." Gaines smiled faintly, standing as the bus came to a halt. "You should," he said, "one call can make all the difference." As he stepped off the bus and into the afternoon sunlight, the passengers watched him go. His quiet strength had left an impression, one they wouldn't soon forget. The story reminds us that time with our loved ones is precious. The words we speak, whether kind or cruel, carry weight and can shape the bonds we share. Respect, humility, and gratitude are lessons worth learning before it's too late. If this story moved you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you love. Say the words you've been meaning to say. And if you want more stories that inspire and make you think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's spread kindness together.